Well, I've been a fan of old movies ever since I can remember. I used to watch them when I came home from school in the afternoon, and on Saturday nights, I'd watch the late movie. And oftentimes, the host spent more time clowning than he did showing the movie. So when cable came along in the 1980s, I became even more of a big fan, first on TNT and then on TCM. I saw some of Jeanette and Gene's movies at that time. I remember seeing Sweethearts and Three Daring Daughters and Flying Down to Rio and The Best Man. I really enjoyed them, but I really didn't become a big fan. In 2011, I saw some of Jeanette's movies on TCM, and I did become a big fan. And whenever I become interested in a celebrity, I always try to see as much of their work as I can and also learn about as much about them as I can. So I joined a couple of online groups about Jeanette, and I discovered that there was a lot of conflicting information. I also learned very fast that there are two distinct groups of fans. There are the fans who think that Jeanette and Gene had a very happy 27-and-a-half-year marriage, and there are those who think that she had a long-term affair with Nelson Eddy, her frequent co-star. And these groups of fans do not get along, and it's very, very obvious that they don't get along. My first thing to do was to read everything I could find, all the books, and there have been quite a few books written about Jeanette, a lot of articles, and anything I could find. And some things just didn't seem to make sense to me. So I started the timeline, and as I would find, dates of Jeanette's appearances on radio or on stage or on, later on television or whatever, I would add them to my timeline. Or if I found out, she was at a party on such and such a date, I would add that. Then a few years ago, I obtained a lot of letters that Jeanette and Gene had written to each other, starting from their courtship days through the early 1960s. And after reading their correspondence, there was no doubt in my mind that they had a very happy marriage, and that Nelson was a very good friend of theirs, but there was nothing going on beyond that. In fact, he was actually Gene's friend before either of them really knew Jeanette very well. One of the questions I often get asked is, did Jeanette and Gene get along 100% of the time? And the answer is no. They were human. Every couple has their ups and downs. And part of what really endeared them to me was the fact that they were so human. At one of Jeanette's fan club banquets, Gene was talking about the house that they lived in for 26 years. And he had a wonderful quote. He said, "We did have a very happy life in that house. We had our fights, and we had our arguments, and we had our makeups. And it was a lot of living in that house, which is the way it's supposed to be." And I think that pretty much sums up their marriage. They had a lot in common. They both started performing when they were children. They both worked on Broadway in the 1920s before they went to Hollywood. And they both started off at Paramount and really gained more success at other studios, her at MGM and him at RKO. Despite having these career things in common, they both came from very different backgrounds. Jeanette was born in Philadelphia, and she came from a very close, loving family. She performed because she wanted to. She lived in the same house until she was 16. She had a lot of friends throughout her life that she went to school with. A few of them she even remembered in her will. On the other hand, Gene was born in Brooklyn. His family moved around a lot, so he didn't have a lot of close friends. His parents separated when he was 11, and he was basically left to support his mother and brother. And his mother was very close to him and very jealous and possessive. And throughout his relationship with Jeanette, his mother did everything she could to try to break them up. From when they first got serious dating throughout their marriage until the day she died. And I have read a lot of her letters to Jeanette, and she just was not a nice woman. I'm sure that at times Gene felt like he was in a tug of war. Jeanette and Gene knew each other very casually from Hollywood parties in the early 1930s. And they like to tell the story about how they met 3 times, which led to their going out. The first was at a birthday party for Rosie Dolly of the Dolly Sisters in October of 1934. They each were standing on the doorstep waiting for somebody to answer the door, and they both didn't have dates with them, and so they introduced themselves to each other. And Rosie opened the door and assumed they came together, which of course was not the case. And at the party, they really didn't see that much of each other. Gene was pursuing Loretta Young, and Jeanette was being chased by Howard Hughes. So several months later, they ended up at another party. This time it was a brunch that was given by their attorney, Louis Swartz. And Jeanette was waiting for them to answer the door, and she heard a whistle behind her, and she turned around to see who was whistling, and it was Gene, and he kidded her and asked her if she always looked when somebody whistled at her. So this time they were kind of more interested in each other, and as they were having brunch, they were, kind of making eyes at each other across the table. So less than a week later, they both had gone to a preview of Les Miserables at Grauman's Chinese Theater. And they both went to the box office to get their tickets, and they ran into each other again. So they decided to sit together, and Gene was with either his mother or his publicist. There are different reports about that. And Jeanette was with her mother. So they all sat together, and afterwards they went down the street to Brown's for an ice cream soda. And Gene said, the way we keep running into each other, the press is starting to think that, something's going on. So I think it's time that we had a date. And he invited Jeanette to go dancing the next night. And she said, well, she thought it would be more proper if he came to her mother's house for dinner. So he did. And that kind of began their romance. But it didn't start out perfectly. Jeanette served eggplant parmesan, which was one of her specialties. She was not a great cook, but that was one thing that she apparently was very good at making. And Gene detested eggplant, but he ate it anyway because he wanted to be polite. And of course, he's trying to impress her. And they were both kind of nervous. So in the beginning, they weren't really talking very much. And then Gene got to be really talkative, but he kept talking to Jeanette's mother instead of to her. So it was kind of an auspicious start, but they agreed, that they would see each other again. Unfortunately, they couldn't do it right away because Jeanette and her mother were getting ready to go on vacation to Hawaii, and then Gene was going on a personal appearance tour. So when they both were finally back in California, which was several months later in June, they ended up going on their first date to the Coconut Grove on June 17th, 1935. And they started seeing each other a lot. They would go dancing and to dinner and amusement parks and all kinds of things. Unlike a lot of stars at the time who would elope, they waited over a year before they got engaged, and then they waited 10 months before they got married. And Jeanette wanted to do everything in a very proper, old-fashioned way, and she wanted, the engagement and bridal showers and a church wedding and a proper honeymoon. And so they both talked to their studios and told them, when they planned to get married and that they would have enough time, to clear their schedule so they could have time for a honeymoon. Their bridal party included a lot of celebrities. Ginger Rogers and Fay Ray were among her bridesmaids. And among the ushers were Alan Jones and Harold Lloyd and Basil Rathbone. Nelson Eddy, he sang 2 songs at the wedding, Oh Promise Me, and Jeanette and Gene's favorite hymn, Oh Perfect Love. There were over 15,000 people waiting outside the church to try to get a glimpse of all the famous people going in. Their wedding was like a who's who with all the celebrities and the studio heads and everything. And of course, a lot of the press too was there, like Walter Winchell and Willa Parsons and, all the big names of the day. But in addition to that, they had also invited a lot of the crew from their studios, like the hairdressers and the cameramen and everything. And one of Jeanette's old friends from Philadelphia also was there. She'd invited several of her old friends, but I think only one of them actually was at the wedding. And Jeanette's matron of honor was her sister Blossom, who many of you remember from the Addams Family. She played Grandmama. And Gene's brother was his best man. And afterwards, they had a reception at Jeanette's mother's house. And so then they were going off on what they thought was going to be their honeymoon. And Gene told Jeanette that they were driving to Santa Barbara to spend a few days because she had to go back to the studio a couple of days later to finish up some retakes for The Firefly. So they started out on the road, and he ended up stopping at this house in Bel Air. And Jeanette said, what are you doing? Why are we stopping here? And he says, we're home. And she's like, well, this isn't where you live. And he said, no, we're home. This is our new house. And, she argued with him and everything. And finally she said, well, if it's our house, how much did you pay for it? And he laughed and wouldn't tell her. And then she kind of started to believe him. So he carried her over the threshold and the whole, romantic thing. And he had, with the help of her secretary and her maid and their publicist, Helen Ferguson, he had all of her possessions, all the wedding gifts, her clothes and everything at this house, which he had decorated to the style that she liked, just to surprise her in this big romantic gesture. And they ended up living there for 26 years until Jeanette's heart started having problems and the stairs there really became too much for her. There were a lot of different levels on the house. You would go up and down several stairs to go to almost every room on the first floor. It really would have been difficult to have an elevator installed because it was so many levels. And of course, outside too, they had all these gardens that were on different levels. And even to get from the house to the driveway, you had to go up steps. So really, it would have been very taxing on her heart. So they moved to an apartment and they sold their house to their business manager. And then ultimately, he ended up selling it to John and Michelle Phillips of the Mamas and the Papas. And they pretty much trashed it, which is very sad. Then in the 80s, it was restored and several different people lived there. And then the final owner ended up tearing it down. He owned several different pieces of property on their street, including the Kirkaby Mansion, which was across the street from them, which of course was used as the front of the mansion on the Beverly Hillbillies. And anyway, he tore it down to make a vineyard. And eventually he died and the property came up for sale again, and it sold last year for $12 million, and that was without a house on it. And I'm sure that Jeanette and Gene would be flabbergasted that it sold for that much money. Jeanette and Gene had a very happy life together until World War II. They were both very patriotic. And beginning in September of 1941, before the United States had even entered the war, they decided they wanted to do something besides just donate money. So they started something that they called date leaves. And every other Sunday, they would invite 10 servicemen and 10 co-eds from UCLA and USC to their house for an afternoon of innocent fun. Jeanette had read a magazine article where a serviceman was complaining that he couldn't meet so-called nice girls. And she thought this would be a good way. They worked through the USO and the deans of women at the colleges. And they would all have these 10 couples, and they could dance or swim or play games or play cards or sing around the piano or whatever. And Jeanette and Gene hosted it, were the chaperones. They, played games with them. They served the food. They cooked the food. Gene often barbecued, and Jeanette would make homemade ice cream. And it was just very, very innocent. The idea spread, and a lot of other celebrities started opening their homes to servicemen. And then Jeanette wrote an article about it, and the idea spread across the United States and Canada. And even after Gene entered the service, Jeanette continued to host date leaves whenever she wasn't on tour. Gene was one of the first celebrities to register for the draft in October 1940. And he enlisted in the Army Air Force in January of 1942, shortly after Pearl Harbor. He served in England and the United States, and he rose to the rank of major. And after the war, he was in the Air Force Reserve, and he served in that until he was forced to retire when he was 60, because that's the law. And he eventually rose to the rank of colonel. And during the Vietnam War, he flew several supply missions, and apparently they were quite dangerous, and the planes he was flying in were shot at and everything. And he got several awards for his service during the war, and also during the Vietnam War. During World War II, Jeanette pretty much kept busy on the home front doing everything she could. She entertained at camps and military hospitals and canteens. She raised money for wartime causes. She sold war bonds. She appeared on broadcasts for the Armed Forces Radio Network. All the while, she was continuing her professional career with radio and concerts and opera. She was a founding member of the American Women's Voluntary Services, and she ended up in the fall of 1942. She raised almost $100,000 for Army emergency relief. She donated the proceeds from her concerts, and she also would auction off encores at the end, and all that money went to Army emergency relief, and her contribution was the largest from a single person to that charity. Long after the war, they also continued to be very active with the military. In addition to Gene's service, they would entertain at military hospitals, and during the 1949 Christmas season, they traveled to Europe with the USO and entertained servicemen and their families who were stationed in Europe. One volume of my book is transcriptions of their surviving correspondence during the war. And I'm going to read a letter from each of them to show you a little bit what their correspondence was like. Some of the letters were very mundane, talking about, what they were doing. And some of them were romantic, and some of them were funny. Gene's in particular. In one, he talked about when he was out on an assignment and he was having trouble finding toilet paper. And this led to Jeanette sending him a roll of toilet paper for Christmas. And given the year we've had, I think we can all relate to this story pretty much. And then another story, he talked about the roundabouts in England. And it's come that whenever I see a roundabout when I'm out driving, I think about Gene and his story about what a nightmare they were, because I hate them too. In their letters, they called each other by their nicknames. And there were some things that they said repeatedly to each other. One was, "You're the best." And another was they would ask each other to spare them a thought. What really touched me about their correspondence was that they were just like everybody else during the war, that they had the same thoughts and the same fears about what was going on in the world and what the future held and everything else. And it just showed again that they were very human, that they weren't just stars. The first letter I'm going to read is written by Jeanette, and she wrote it to Gene when he went off for basic training. He went to officers training school in Pennsylvania, and she tucked it in his bag along with a heart-shaped locket for his keychain. And on one side was a picture of her, and on the other side was a picture of his Irish setter Trey, which she gave him for their first Christmas together in 1935. My sweetheart, this is simply to tell you once more, I love you, as if you didn't already know. And all the love in my heart and body is with you every minute. Naturally, I'll expect you to take good care of it. And remember, you're next to the best, because even in war, you can't get rid of me. I have a very secure feeling that you're coming back to me, all ready to continue with our plans. You're too good to give up, so I'll never stop thinking of them. Think of all the songs I've sung to the world and what they mean. And now, if I tried, I couldn't sing them to you. Not with my voice, but with my heart, yes. Maybe they're really just meant for us anyway. And now I want you to promise that occasionally you'll write me a silly, sentimental letter and pretend we're just as adolescent as we were 6 or 7 years ago. Squirt face. I hope you'll put this little gadget on your keychain so that if going ever gets difficult, my heart will be there to offer you whatever you need of me. That's all for now, dearest. The rest is all shut up inside where even you can't see. A girl has got to have a couple of secrets, don't you know? Have a good time, dearie, and spare me a thought, Mrs. Hunky. One of Jean's nicknames for Jeanette was Bunko, Bunky, or Bunk, and she always claimed that they could not remember how it got started. Well, I have speculated, because of the time frame that it started, that it probably had to do with them being bunkmates per se on the train when they went on their first real vacation together. While he was stationed in England, they both tried to circumvent the censors a lot by sending letters to friends who were traveling back and forth between England and the United States. And it wasn't that they were trying to tell military secrets, but it was more that they wanted to be romantic and honest with each other, and they really had no privacy, being celebrities and the censors reading their letters. And also it was a thing that the mail often took so long to arrive. So I'm going to read you a letter that Jean sent via a friend. And the only things you really need to know from this are that Kay Coverman was MGM mogul Louis B. Mayer's executive secretary, and that Grace referred to Jeanette's voice teacher. January 5th, 1943. Well, Bunk, here it is, 1943, and we didn't get to celebrate it together. Well, I hope you got my cable, because at midnight my time, 4 p.m. your time, I was right square along with side of you drinking to you. I went to a party given by the RAF in an old barn, and there were quite a few people there, jammed in fact. But when midnight approached, I was all alone with you, and we saw the new year in together, just like last year. About 1 a.m. in the morning, I went with the party to a high-ranking RAF officer's house, the equivalent of a brigadier general, and he himself cooked kippers for us. I had 2, and they were excellent indeed. We got back to the post at about 2 a.m. and had a good night's sleep, and I was one of the few who showed up next day without a hangover. I received another letter from you yesterday, which was mailed from home on December 4th, just about a month's time. Not too bad nowadays, when the mail delivery is not very prompt. It was a good letter. I enjoyed it. Wish I could have been there to have shared in the joy of getting back into the house after an absence. I know exactly how you felt. Today I received a cable from Kay Coverman, which was really sweet of her. When one is far away, it doesn't seem possible that old friends can have time to think about you enough to send you a remembrance, and you have no idea of the warm glow you experience when you do receive one. When you see Kay, thank her for me, will you? I'm glad to hear that Trey is behaving himself. I often think how nice it would be to go for that evening walk. Let him in the house once in a while for me. I wonder how long this damned war will last. Even from this point, it's impossible to tell. So much depends on the people at home. It's a little discouraging to pick up life and see the pettiness and confusion that still goes on, while so many over here are putting out their own blood to win. Let those that think we're on the brink of victory have a look at a map and see what distances lie before us. I think it'll be a long time yet, a long time. Which leads me to something I'd like to have you do for me. I think this war will certainly go on for quite a while. If it does, it will probably be in the cards for me to receive a majority, and you'll be the wife of a major who loves you. If, as, and when that time arrives, I'd like to wear some major's leaves which you have sent me. Okay? Will you send me 5 sets? I can buy them here, but I'd rather have them from you. I'd like 4 sets of embroidered major's leaves. The embroidered ones are the better kind, because they don't catch on overcoats as the metal ones do. And 1 set of metal ones to use on my flying jacket. The manager of Westwood Desmond's, I forget his name at the moment, will be able to help you get them. I think you can send them Air Express, and I'll get them in a fairly short time. Thank you, Bunko. Don't forget to send your love along with them. Darling, I certainly have been homesick and lonesome for you the last few weeks. Not that I'm the only one, but I'm naturally more concerned with my own lonesomeness than anyone else. It's a kind of lonesomeness that keeps you from going to sleep at night, or then again wakes you in the middle of the night when you're dead tired, and besets you with all the little memories that you never thought much about before. The chimes in Westwood playing Silent Night, as you mentioned in your letter, which brings to mind all the 1,001 joys and chores of trimming the tree and Christmasing up the house, riding along Wilshire Boulevard with you close beside me, breakfasting on the little wooden folding table while you have yours in bed, meeting you at Grace's in the morning, playing on the Baldwin and hearing the front door squeak open from its surrounding metal draft proofing, and you breezing in whistling, "Old MacDonald had a farm." Fun, wasn't it? Well, sweetheart, one day we'll be together again and resume life with a new vigor. And when that happens, we will have grown just that much more. And we'll have just that much greater capacity to enjoy what we have in spiritual blessings and material possessions. Just to keep watching the future. I'm going to bed now, Bunko. I'll give this letter to someone to mail in the States and hope not too long a time passes before you receive it. I expect to be on a trip beginning on or about the 10th of January and may not be able to write often, but I'll try and write to you during the trip, which should take about 3 weeks. Meantime, spare me a thought now and then, and know that your old man loves you more than you can imagine. All my love, Old Man Raymond. When Gene transferred back to the United States, they were able to see each other a little bit. Sometimes when she was on tour, she would be performing somewhere close to where he was stationed, or he'd be able to get leave and meet her. They tried to pretend like it was a series of honeymoons, but Jeanette said really it was just stressful for both of them. After the war, they were like a lot of returning soldiers. The studio system had changed, the public's taste in movies changed, and the rest of their lives, they really spent it trying to find their place in the entertainment industry. They both worked a lot on stage and radio and TV and occasionally in movies, but they never really achieved the fame that they had before the war. Eventually, it put a strain on their marriage because they were often apart when they were performing. In 1954, Jeanette ended up having a nervous breakdown, and that kind of caused them both to step back and re-examine their marriage and decide if it was worth saving. Gene wrote, "I can't say that illness is fortunate, but if it has brought us to a greater depth of understanding, love, and happiness, perhaps God has moved again in a mysterious way." From then on, they tried to, work on their marriage if they had any problems. And as we said, they stayed married until Jeanette passed away. They both were always very gracious to their fans, and they appreciated them. And they would let them come backstage when they were performing on stage or when they were broadcasting on radio and TV. In 1962, the largest fan club that Jeanette had celebrated its 25th anniversary, and it was also Jeanette and Gene's 25th anniversary. So they decided to do something to celebrate, and they invited members of her fan club to come to California, and they had a 3-day celebration. The first night, the fans all went to dinner at the Luau restaurant, and Jeanette and Gene paid for it. And they had a drawing, and they gave away some prizes and things. And of course, they were all able to pose with Jeanette and Gene, and they all told stories and things. And there is some silent film that has survived from that one of the fans took. The second day, they all went to MGM, and they got a tour, and they had a screening of Smiling Through and Jeanette's episode of This Is Your Life. And Jeanette met them there and posed with them on the steps of the Irving Thalberg building. And then the third day, they went to Jeanette and Gene's house. And Jeanette had to leave shortly after they arrived for a medical appointment. And she just told them to make themselves at home and, explore the house and the grounds. And the only one that was there was their housekeeper. And a lot of people are very shocked that, she would trust them to just roam around freely. But she trusted them that, they were her friends. And she knew that they wouldn't steal anything or break anything or whatever. She christened this the clanclave, which was a pun on conclave because she always considered her fans to be part of her clan. They continued until 2002, and as years went on, they would have almost a week-long celebration with screenings of Jeanette's movies and occasionally some of Gene's movies or TV appearances. And they also would have a visit to Forest Lawn where Jeanette was interred. And then the final night was a banquet, and oftentimes they would invite celebrities who either had worked with Jeanette or Gene, or who were friends of theirs, or who were fans of theirs, and they would talk about their memories of Jeanette and Gene. And most of the time, Gene would attend as well until his health started declining. In the late 1950s, Jeanette's health began to decline. She was doing a summer stock performance of The King and I in 1956 when she had a heart attack on stage. And she not only finished the show, but she finished the rest of the 2-week run. And every night a doctor would check her blood pressure to make sure she was, it was safe enough for her to go on. But as years passed, her heart problems got worse. And eventually she had arterial transplant surgery by Dr. Michael DeBakey, who was the big heart surgeon pioneer. Despite having that, she never really fully recovered from it. And she passed away January 14th, 1965. Her funeral was held at Forest Lawn, and thousands of fans were lining the area outside the church. Gene allowed for 50 seats in the church for her fans because he knew that's what she would want, because she always considered her fans to be her friends. During the service, they played her recordings of Ah, Sweet Mystery of Life and Ave Maria, and the organist also played songs that had been from her movies, including I'll See You Again, which was Gene's favorite song. And it kind of took on a new meaning that he would be seeing her again in heaven. Gene continued acting after Jeanette died, and he mostly did TV and retired in 1975 and concentrated more on real estate and his business investments. And he kept an office and went there frequently. And he remarried in 1974. And coincidentally, his new wife, her name was actually Nellie, but she called herself Nelson, which was kind of funny, given the whole Nelson Eddy thing. And they called her Nels for short. And she passed away in 1995. Through the years, Gene took care of many people in addition to his 2 wives. Of course, Jeanette's health had been failing in her later years, and his second wife had Alzheimer's, and he kept her at home and was able to hire nurses to help care for her. He also helped support his brother's wife after his brother passed away. Jeanette's voice teacher, Grace Newell, he continued to visit her and look after her. And Jeanette's sister, Blossom, he helped pay off the mortgage on her house. When she had a debilitating stroke, he hired private nurses to help care for her so she could stay in her home. And oftentimes he had trouble finding somebody that wanted to work weekends, and so he would stay with her, which I think really says a lot about his character. Eventually, Blossom's health got such that she had to permanently move into the motion picture and television country house and hospital. And Gene would visit her frequently. He would take her to dinner, and he would see to it that she was able to attend Jeanette's fan club banquets as long as she was able. Gene spent his last years mostly homebound after he had a stroke, and he was able to attend one last clanclave before he passed away in 1998. He died of pneumonia a few months before he would have turned 90. Before his death, he arranged for a scholarship to be established at USC in memory of Jeanette, and they also ended up naming a recital hall after her. And Gene, for many years, was on the board of the Motion Picture Home. And in 1979, he made an anonymous donation of $50,000 in memory of Jeanette to have their kitchen remodeled. And he wanted it to be anonymous because he wanted the emphasis to be on her, not on him. And there's still a plaque hanging at the motion picture home with her name and "Give Us This Day" on it. I'm sure you wonder how I came to own all these letters that are in my books. And it's kind of an interesting story. When Jeanette and Gene moved from their house to an apartment, she gave a lot of material to her 2 fan clubs. She thought that they could not only use it in their club journals, but also that they could auction off some of the things in the fan clubs to raise money for the charities that they supported. And then after Jeanette passed away, Gene gave even more material to the fan club that was still going on. The other one disbanded when Jeanette died. So eventually his thought was that he would give them all this material, and then eventually he would find some place to donate it, an archive or a library or whatever. And he investigated several places, but he never really decided where he wanted it donated. And subsequently he died. Well, the fan club presidents also never decided where they wanted it donated, and they died. So in the end, the nephew of one of the fan club presidents hired an estate sale company to come in and clean out the house, which included a lot of material that had belonged to Jeanette and Gene. And they ended up selling it, and some friends and I went together and bought all that we could. In particular, I wanted to get a hold of this correspondence because I knew that if the people that believed that Jeanette had an affair with Nelson Eddy got a hold of it, that it would never see the light of day if it proved that Jeanette and Gene had a happy marriage. And so subsequently, after I read it, I wanted to share it because I think it's important for people to hear their own words. And also, Jeanette had planned to quote from some of these letters in her autobiography. And so I don't feel like I was, telling tales out of school or doing anything that she would disapprove of in sharing these letters, because she was going to quote from them. One of the reasons that these rumors, let's start over again. One of the reasons that these rumors of an affair persist is that Gene and Nelson slightly resembled one another, particularly in the early 30s. Gene had almost platinum colored hair, and Nelson had gone prematurely gray, and his hair was an odd kind of silvery shade. And there just weren't that many other people in Hollywood with this hair color. And then later on, after they were both associated with Jeanette, the people that wanted her to be with Nelson would see her with Gene and just kind of assume it was Nelson. And they both got a big kick out of it and would joke about it. And if fans stopped them and called them by the wrong name, they would just sign that name, figuring, it would make the fans happy. When Jeanette and Gene were on the Ed Sullivan Show, Gene was the host, and he asked her what was the question that she got most often when she was on tour, and she said, "Why didn't you marry Nelson Eddy?" And of course he laughed and she laughed and the audience laughed, and it's good that they could all joke about it because it could have been a very uncomfortable situation. And of course Nelson and his wife used to socialize a lot with Jeanette and Gene and would come to parties at their house and they'd go out to dinner together and all kinds of things. So they were friends. There were also lots of rumors in the press that they didn't get along, and that wasn't true either. Like any working colleagues, sometimes they would fight when they were working, but it was just, something about the scene or whatever. It wasn't that they hated each other. They really did get along. I've seen all of Jeanette's movies, including the one reel that exists of a movie that is lost, which is Annabelle's Affairs. Hoping someday the rest of it will show up. I've seen a lot of Gene's movies. Her favorite was Maytime because it gave her such a good acting challenge. She was able to age from a young woman to an elderly one, and her voice and inflections and movement and everything was really a good acting challenge for her. And she won an award for it from the Screen Actors Guild. Sadly, at that time, a lot of musical performers really, were not pushed for Oscars. but she did get wonderful reviews for that movie and did get a lot of acclaim for it. And the other two movies that she always mentioned as being favorites were San Francisco and Smiling Through. In San Francisco, it was more of a drama with music, which again allowed her a good acting challenge and also allowed her to sing some opera, which she did in a few other movies. And in Smiling Through, she got to work with Gene, which was the only time that they worked together in a movie. And it also allowed her to play two different characters, and it was an acting challenge to make them very distinct, both in their voice and their mannerisms. Gene, his favorite movie of his was Zoo in Budapest with Loretta Young, and he liked it because it allowed him to show off his athletic abilities in addition to his acting. Although he oftentimes said he didn't like any of his movies and he didn't want to watch them. At one point, somebody had told him at one of the clanclaves that some cable station was showing a lot of his movies. And he says, I don't get it. And if I got it, I wouldn't watch them anyway. So anyway, that's their opinions of their movies. My opinions of their movies are different. My favorite movie is Cairo, which really showed off Jeanette's comedic talents. And I think that had she not been pigeonholed by MGM, she very easily could have done a lot of the comedies that Irene Dunne did. It broke my heart when I read a quote from Jeanette where she talked about how much she hated this movie. And I think part of it may have been that she associated it with Gene going off to officers training school, and she was making it while he was gone, and then subsequently was doing retakes around the time he was shipped off to England. So maybe, you know, if she saw it later on, maybe she would have liked it better. I also really like Sweethearts. I'm a sucker for a backstage story. I love Rosemary. I love 1 Hour with You. Really, the only one that I don't like is The Vagabond King. And if I ever saw it in its color original form, maybe I would like it better. But as it is, no. With Gene, my favorite movies are Smartest Girl in Town, which included a song that he wrote, and Walking on Air, and Plunder Road. I have to say that I began as a Jeanette fan, and I just kind of considered Gene an accessory. I liked him, but I didn't really actively seek seeing his movies or collecting material on him. After I read his letters, I kind of felt like I got to know him. And then I did more research on him, and I really, really came to admire him, not only his acting, but him as a human being. He really was funny, as was Jeanette, and it's really a shame that they didn't get to utilize that more in their careers, both on screen and in his writing, because he did write several screenplays that weren't produced, and of course he wrote the pilot Prima Donna for Jeanette. I've collected a lot of memorabilia, photos, scrapbooks. I have a cigarette box that was a wedding gift for them. I have a couple of compacts. And I have this clip, which I'm going to try to show. And it's just costume jewelry. But apparently Jeanette really liked sapphires and things that look like sapphires, because her engagement ring was a sapphire. Her favorite pin that she could wear either as a brooch or a necklace, it was a sapphire. And she collected sapphire crystal. So apparently it was really something, you know, a color that she liked. I've tried collecting some of their radio and TV appearances, which isn't always easy. Many of them are lost, and particularly the TV things, because so many of them were live and some of them were recorded on kinescope, and of course they're lost. I hope that people will continue to discover their movies through TCM and through screenings and DVDs, and that they will get more younger fans. I have noticed online that a lot of people that, you know, either weren't born when they were around, or like me, were just little children when they were, you know, when Jeanette died, I was just a little child, but have been able to discover their movies through other sources. Are there any questions?
If you have a question, you can either type it into the chat, or you can also unmute yourself and ask your question.
I was wondering, did she like her last two films that she made?
Yes, she did. There's a letter that she wrote to Hedda Hopper about Three Daring Daughters. And in that, she talked about, she thought it would have been much more successful if it had been with Nelson Eddy. A lot of people kind of object to Jose Iturbi, don't think he's much of a leading man, which I kind of agree. I think it would have been a better movie with a different leading man. I think it would have been more believable that, you know, she was swept off her feet. But I've never really heard her complain about The Sun Comes Up. She didn't really like location work. But other than that, I don't recall reading anything where she said she disliked it. And for years, she really was looking for, you know, another script to do. You know, she didn't really necessarily plan to make that her last movie. And there were projects that Gene had started for her. In fact, he was working on a movie for her and Nelson to be filmed in England, and Nelson didn't want to film it in England. In fact, there were several projects through the years that he turned down, and she was kind of ticked off about it at the time, but later on she kind of understood his wanting not to be considered part of a team all the time. And I think, you know, by the late 50s, she kind of felt the same way, that they wanted to be considered as individuals, not just, you know, Jeanette and Nelson, the operetta singers.
And in your book, you talk about she did a lot of work during World War II for the war effort.
Yes.
I mean, she did a lot of performing.
Yes,
you want to talk about that a little bit? Yeah.
Oftentimes she was on the road more than she was home. You know, that she was off at one point. She, you know, was gone for a long time selling war bonds in New York, and helping raise money for the war relief fund. And of course, you know, throughout this, she was continuing her recital career. She also made her opera debut during World War II. She performed Romeo and Juliet in Canada, and had aspirations to sing for the Met, and she was kind of ticked off about that whole thing. Basically, the manager at the Met told her to study Romeo and Juliet, and kind of hinted that, you know, she could sing it at the Met. And then after she was doing these performances in Canada, he would not even go to see them because there were all these stories in the newspaper that she was going to sing for the Met, and he felt like the pressure was being put on him. And then he kind of blamed his board of directors that like they didn't want to hire her because she was a movie star. And I think that always kind of bothered her. That was like the one thing that career-wise she was never able to fulfill. But she did, you know, sing opera in Canada, in Chicago, in my hometown of Cincinnati, Milwaukee, and her hometown of Philadelphia. So I think she kind of got the opera singing out of her system by then. And later on said that she really liked doing other things more than opera, with, you know, the recitals and things where she could interact more with the fans, you know, with their requests for encores, and, you know, set up her own program, and, you know, didn't necessarily have to follow a script or anything.
Does anybody else have a question or anything? Maybe could you talk just a little bit about how many dogs did they have, and well, about the, yeah.
At one time, the most they ever had at one time was 6. Before they got married, she had a Skye Terrier named Stormy, and a Bedlington named Sunny, and an English sheepdog named Captain. And Captain was sent off to the farm because he kept biting people and basically didn't want anybody to be around people, and he didn't get along with Gene. So that was like his kind of kiss of death. So he got sent off to the farm before they got married. And then Eventually they had 2 Irish setters, Trey and Mike. And then they had another dog, and I don't know what kind of breed he was. I have seen some pictures of him. It was a smaller dog named Ask Him. And he eventually went to live with Gene's mother, poor dog. And he died sometime during World War II. And then later on, they got another Skye Terrier that was named Misty after Stormy passed away. And Misty was their last dog. Gene bought him for Christmas for Jeanette in 1943, and he lived until 1954. And he would travel with Jeanette sometimes when she was on her recital tours. And then in 1951, Jeanette and Gene did a tour of the play The Guardsman, and Misty went on the road with them then, and a lot of fans got to meet him backstage, and he'd do little tricks for them and everything. But they were big dog lovers. And after Jeanette died and Gene remarried, he also had Russian wolfhounds with his second wife. So they were both big dog lovers.
There is a question. I don't know. I don't know if you can see it. It says.
I cannot.
It says so much about Jeanette's work ethic that when she was studying with Lottie Lehman, how much Lehman admired her and was so surprised she was more than just a movie star. It's like Leh.
Last part of that, I got as far as Lottie Lehman, and then my phone rang, and I lost.
It said she admired her and was so surprised she was much more than just a movie star. Do you know anything about her?
Yes, Jeanette trained with her before she did Faust, and also as with leader songs. And from all that I've read, Lottie Lehman was very impressed with Jeanette. I think she came in thinking, it's a movie star, and she's gonna, be a diva. And she found that was not the case at all, that Jeanette worked very hard to study all that she could. She studied many languages, in order to be able to sing in other languages in her concerts and things. And I believe that Lottie Lehman also had talked about an opera that she thought Jeanette would have done very well in. And frankly, I've forgotten what it was at this point. But I think that she wished that Jeanette would have pursued more of the classical singing because she was so talented and because she did work so hard at it.
And Jeanette even recorded some of her films she made in different languages.
Yes, she did several of them in French, and the French.
That's before they had dubbing.
No,
right?
No. In fact, that was one of her big things that she fought over with Louis B. Mayer, was that he wanted to dub her singing in some other languages, for the European market. And she said, this is my stock in trade. You are not going to dub my singing. It's one thing to dub my speech or whatever when these films, go to another country. You are not going to dub my singing. And she really fought for that. But back in her Paramount days, she and Marie Chevalier made French versions of several of their movies. And I know that the version of 1 Hour with You, they actually filmed it simultaneously with different supporting players. It was her and Marie Chevalier, but the other leading roles were all different actors. And the same when they did The Merry Widow at MGM. And I've seen that. The French version of 1 Hour with You is said to be lost. Again, we don't really know for sure about this. It could be hiding in somebody's attic. But no, she very much worked hard on her languages. And in later years, she studied Spanish because she did do some performing in Mexico. And she really thought Spanish was a much more difficult language. And I don't know if it was because she had all this instruction in French and also had, done singing in German and other languages, or what the thing was, why she thought Spanish was so hard. As someone who took Spanish in high school and Latin in high school, to me, Spanish was very easy after coming off of Latin. So I don't know.
Does anyone know why she developed her heart condition, at a relatively young age?
No, there's been speculation that she may have had rheumatic fever. And in 1954, she was very, very ill. She had done 2 different brief tours of the musical Bittersweet on stage. And she had just returned from one, and she had been ill when she was doing it in St. Charles, Illinois, apparently like with the flu or a cold or something. And at the time, she and Gene were living in New York. And so when she went back to New York, it was shortly after that she collapsed and had a very, very high fever. And apparently it was so high that they were concerned about moving her to the hospital. And this was at the same time she ended up having a nervous breakdown. I have wondered if this high fever wasn't rheumatic fever because of the different symptoms that they have talked about and the fact that she did later have heart problems, that it may have, affected her heart. My dad had rheumatic fever when he was a child, and it affected his heart. So, that's why I wonder if that wasn't part of the problem. And if not, maybe just the fact that she did have this high fever may have affected it, because it was only 2 years later that she had this heart attack on stage.
Okay. Well, does anyone have any other questions at all? Well, Maggie, I'd like to thank you very much for having this author talk.
Thank you.
And you have 3 volumes. I'll see you again. And it's,
I can show them if you'd
very
like.
detailed.
My shameless plug. There's volume 1, which is probably coming up backwards. And volume 2.
Yeah, it's not backwards on my side.
Okay, it is on mine. That's why I say that. Okay, and here's volume 3. And there are a lot of photos in them. Some of them came from Jeanette and Gene's personal collection. And hopefully I've set the record straight on some of the rumors. And I tried to dispel some of the rumors and correct some of the misinformation that's out there, both in books and on the internet.
It's too bad on Wikipedia, they have a lot of different facts.
Yes. Alternative facts.
Yes.
Fake news, if you will.
Well, thank you very much, and thank everybody for coming. I guess we'll see you around. And they show a lot of her films and Gene Raymond's films on TCM.
Yes, they do.
On DVD. Well, thank you very much.
I think all of her MGM films, except the French version of The Merry Widow, are on DVD.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you very much, and thank everybody for coming.
Thank you.
See you later. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.